The following program is brought to you in part by the film Backdoor Channels, The Price of Peace.
Welcome to another Leon Charney Report. We have a really eclectic and exciting show tonight.
My name is Miri Eisin. I'm a retired colonel from the Israeli Defense Forces. After that, I was the Israeli Prime Minister's international media advisor. Today, I do a lot of lecturing on geopolitics in Israel and around the world. I still do a lot of work both as a government spokesperson. In a very sad way, when bad things happen, you get to see me on TV. I speak then both on behalf of the government or about Israel in the media, again, both in the Israeli channels, but mainly all around the international arena. It's a very challenging arena. It has been for the last 15 years, hasn't gotten any better. First of all, most of them are quite hostile. Second of all, like with everything, there's diversity. But I think that I find Ireland to be the most hostile. After that, different Scandinavian countries. There's a difference between them. Sweden on one level, Norway on a different level. There's gaps between them, but they're quite hostile. Spain is very hostile. And as I say, so when I go down, what, France isn't hostile, people are saying right now? Sadly, the ones who find balance are Germany, and that most definitely has to do with Germany's complex relationship with Israel, with the Jewish people, and so they are less hostile, certainly overtly. And then it comes and goes. The Czech Republic, it depends on the time period. Holland is not overtly hostile when it comes to the media, but when you cross the border into Belgium, you really wonder where you are. So it's a challenge anywhere you go. I try as much as I can, again, to talk to us. I don't ignore the hostility, but if I stand up and I get angry, you know what people are going to remember? The angry Israeli. They already think that we are militant, that we are vulgar, and if they see me angry, yay, I've lived up to all their expectations. I smile, I talk softly, I try to broaden the argument, I try not to ever lose my cool. I think that's the best way to handle hostile environments. A few years ago, a group of women started to get together to meet. It was actually something that was done internationally to get women engaged in discourse, more on the aspect of discourse on arriving at a resolution. But we Israeli women met and realized that in Israel there aren't women in the decision-making room. Think about a decision-making room in Israel. Think about the security cabinet room. And suddenly you realize that right now in the Israeli security cabinet room, there's one woman. In the Israeli security cabinet room, in the 4 years prior to that, no women. There's no question that having a woman in the room makes a difference, and there certainly should be more than one. The lack of any women in the security-related national interest issues is a real impediment. We decided to organize ourselves. We put ourselves together as an NGO, and right now what we try to do is to use our own backgrounds, our own expertise to advance having more women in the decision-making process, more women in the security establishment in general. I was the only woman colonel in the Israeli military intelligence. There was one other woman, so I know her. She knows a few others. At the time that I was a colonel in the IDF, there were a little under 500 colonels. We were 18 women. We know each other. That's within the IDF. It's true in most organizations that the women know who they are. There are not of women at high-ranking levels, and we have a tendency to meet each other. we've discovered that we actually really enjoy the networking, the meeting together, the term boys club, and suddenly we discovered that a women's club is kind of nice too. That's a networking aspect. So we reach out, we're willing to go out, speak on the media, to talk so that more women are aware, but we're not just talking to women. This is about Israeli society in general. We want the men, the women, the fathers, the mothers, the boys and the girls to all see both as a role model that everybody can, but we really think that it changes the discourse and the tone of decisions. I think that it's not a question of the woman being the leader. I'm at the stage where what I want is women to be in the room. I absolutely think that it makes a difference around the table. Let's give the most mundane type of aspect. So there are kids around. You take care of your kids, I take care of my kids. At the end, throughout the world and in Israel, usually the women are much more hands-on when it comes to taking care of kids. But this also has to do with national security. When you schedule things, how you look at things both in the home front together with security. Is it always only through the military eyes, or does security have something to do with something broader? Both the military and diplomacy and home front and cybersecurity, all of these are aspects that need to come to the table. A woman's voice is softer, even if she's tough. We're practical, we're there, we're 50% of the population, and we need to be both in the national security arena, just like in any other one. It's an interesting question, and to me, of course, that isn't an impediment that stops anybody. Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader now, isn't willing to talk to the Israeli leader, and he's a man. It doesn't have to do with man or woman. That could be used as an excuse, but that's not the real problem. We've had an Israeli foreign minister who was a woman. She met worldwide with leaders, with her counterparts. You mentioned Golda Meir. Golda Meir was the prime minister of Israel, and she met both Arab leaders. At that time, when I say that, there were ones who weren't willing to meet face to face, but that was because she was Israeli, not because she was a woman. I think that it's important that we realize that the aspect of the woman is irrelevant, and because of that, women should be inside. They bring added ideas. They're part of society, and we're the ones at the end who want to bring in new ideas also on what national security is. It's not that men don't look at it that way, but we do think that there's a broader perspective. I want to add in one more point. In Israel, of all places, we have the draft. The rest of the international community, the rest of the democratic world, they don't have the draft at all. In Israel, not only do we have the draft into the military, we have the draft for women. Meaning we do have that equal setting where 18-year-olds are going into the military. So let's open up that door a bit broader, both in the decision-making process, but also in the military elite itself. We need to see women, not more, this isn't a question just of numbers, but to have that door open to allow them and perhaps to enable them. Personally, I think it'll make everybody's life better. I think that nowadays, much more couples, partners, men and women, understand that they want to divide their time both between the workplace and their home front. And I think that actually that kind of dialogue would be very good for everybody. In that sense about Forum Dvorah, I think that as a forum, when we look around, the only other models that we have are ones where they did it the only other models that they have are the ones where they did it legally. Rwanda, legally, 40% of the parliament, half of the ministers have to be women. In Norway, they did it legally. 35% of the ministers have to be women. I'm for that. In France, it isn't done by law, and yet they appointed there half of the ministers to be women, half of them men. In Spain, it isn't by law, and yet the defense minister is a woman. If you just talk about defense ministers right now, Spain, France, Italy, I'm blanking, but probably it's some Scandinavian country, Finland for sure, have women defense ministers. Why not? Why do you have to have a knife in between your teeth? That's not about that. It's about decision making. It's about understanding. It's about realization that security and national security is not just about looking at things through the gun sights. It goes in all ways. I think that both men and women have loud voices. When women are loud, they call them shrill and assertive or aggressive. You know, women aren't allowed to come out and be assertive. So I think that we have to have a balance in everything. I don't think that women are necessarily the ones who are going to be softer per se, but we do have an added bonus. We listen. I think that women, because of status in society, we do have a tendency to listen a bit more. We know how to be tough. We also know how to multitask and to make a lot of decisions ongoing all of the time. Some of them are momentous and some of them are less so. But again, by not being in the room, there's no question to me that the decision making is different. So Leon Charney was the first person who ever actually did a sit-down, full-talking interview. To this day, I look at it, it's on YouTube, by the way, and it's amazing. Him as an interviewer, but more for me, I was a colonel in the Israeli Defense Forces and not in any place in military intelligence. You need to understand, there are no other military intelligence faces that you've ever seen. You don't see military intelligence officers in uniform when they're in uniform. You only get to interview them after they've retired. I was put in front of the camera when I was still in uniform. It had very harsh implications for my military career in the sense that I couldn't continue in the intelligence. My face was worldwide and known. When I was interviewed by Leon, it was immediately during and after a very large-scale operation that the Israeli military initiated called Operation Defensive Shield after the horrific events within the Second Intifada, mainly of March 2002, 135 Israeli civilians killed in terrorist attacks throughout Israel, and the worst one on the night of the Seder. And after that, Israel, with the IDF, initiated a large-scale operation. I was requested then to actually put aside my military intelligence position to be a spokesperson on behalf of the intelligence community to the international community. It's a rather big changing point for me personally. I think that Operation Defensive Shield was a changing point for Israel in our defense, in our offense, and especially in the way that we presented ourselves to the world. It was a very important stage. So there's always that aspect of why me, or in general, why do we need it? The Israeli Defense Forces never had a spokesperson for the international media. Specifically, when they asked me to come on board, it was with the understanding that Israel needs to fight several battles. There's the land battle, there's the air battle. Nowadays we talk about the cyber battle. But one of the battlegrounds that the IDF participates in, it's not the only one they're battling, is the media battleground. And essentially they came to me and said, we need you to fight a battle. And I changed my entire position because of that. I was not the IDF spokesperson. That is a brigadier general. We've had 2 women already who have done that position in the past. But I was a special spokesperson only for the international media. It was always a joke in Israel that there I was talking to the international media. The Israeli media would come up to me in Hebrew. I'm Israeli, I'm an officer, I'm a colonel. And they'd say, Miri, come and talk to us about what's happening. I'm like, no. You have enough generals to talk to you. So as a colonel, I spoke to the international media. I think they chose me, A, for what you can hear right now. I was born in the States. My language is fluent from having made Aliyah as a kid. I'm completely bilingual, but as you can hear, my English is very good. It's not just knowing English, because we know a lot of people who just know English. I do know how to talk. I do know how to explain. I actually think that my military intelligence background was the one that put me in the position to do this the best way. I'm used to talking to a very hostile audience of officers about the enemy, because I was the military intelligence officer. I had to tell them about what the enemy is supposed to do, and all of the officers, the commanders would sit and you're like, right, what do you know? And so talking to the international media, to journalists, in a sense to the world, I think I used a lot of my background and brought that out in this transition of my own job. So I have a lot to say about this subject, and I'll start with the fact that yes, there's hostility to Israel, but the biggest challenge that Israel has when it comes to the way we are in the media is the framing. Think about the framing. Think about how we talk things through, what we show and what we don't show. We in Israel want the world to see Israel through Israeli eyes, and the media doesn't do that. So we're angry. We want them to show Israel as we see it. We do not view the other side, certainly not on equal footing. And amazingly enough, the other side has a different story. So first of all, I talk to most Israelis. This is not about our being right and the other side being wrong. And until we understand that it's also about framing and that there are two sides and both sides have both things that are right and things that are wrong, we are constantly going to be disappointed. They are going to show in the international community two sides. But here there's a second difference. For Israel, it's about Israel pretty much versus our arena, our neighborhood. We see ourselves both in a conflict with the Palestinians, but we're also in a conflict, Lebanon, Hezbollah. Look at what's happening in Syria between Bashar Assad, the Iranians. I mentioned Iran. The whole aspect of Islamic organizations, everything going around us. Again, for Israel, it's about Israel against many enemies. In the international community, the framing is about Israel against the Palestinians. Think about that difference in framing. When it's about big Israel against little Palestinians, or as I would put it, it's about Israel, big, small, against Lebanon, Syria, Iran, etc., that's a very different framing. And we're constantly disappointed that they're not showing ours, and we don't understand how they're showing a different one. So on this one, it's a question of expectations. I think there's a lot that we could do, but the biggest aspect is to stop thinking in terms of right and wrong. Both sides have right and both sides have wrong, and we need to talk about the framing. Since I retired, I combined teaching at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, which is a private elite college in Israel. I teach there in the School of Government, and I teach about the Israeli-Arab and Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I teach about the narratives of the conflict, and I teach public diplomacy. So that's one aspect, my academic side, which I do part of the year. I also lecture about geopolitics, both in Israel and worldwide. And again, there aren't enough women's voices talking about security, about geopolitics, the way that we frame the world. Not everything should be viewed through the eyes of the gunshot. Everything can be viewed in a broader sense of different types of events that are happening around us. I talk extensively about Israel's international media image. In this, I find there are lots of people, organizations, private individuals like myself who are out there, who are talking. We don't all agree. The fact that I'm willing to say that it's not about right and wrong means that I'm different than most Israelis. For Israelis, it's all about our being right and everybody else being wrong. I differ. I think that we are right, but that's irrelevant. The other side is not wrong. And if it's not about my being right and their being wrong, by presenting it in such a way, we very often make people choose. You have to either choose me because I'm right, or you're choosing the other side's right. I want to leave that argument. I don't want to go down that road. I lecture, as I say, both in Israel and overseas, mainly to what we call the tough audiences. I do preach to the choir, those who are strong supporters and need to hear a broader sense, I think. But I also talk a lot to the very strong anti-Israel voices, not to the ones who disagree or more correctly reject the right for our existence. But there are many people out there who are very critical of Israel without rejecting outright our right to exist. I think that there are more voices than there were in the past, and that makes me happy. I think that there are diverse voices, which I think is excellent. I still think that the bulk of Israelis think that this is about our presenting our case better. And if we just do it better, then you'll get it and you'll know that we're right. But that brings me back to my former argument. I don't think it's about our being right and the other side being wrong. There are more voices out there now of the younger generation, and those are the ones that really give me hope. students, both at IDC, other places inside Israel, Israelis who are studying in campuses overseas, those are the people who are going to make the big impact. They are the ones who are coming out of Israel, and they have a voice, and they talk in what we would call 21st century talk. At the end, I'm a has-been, I'm in my 50s, talking to campus students is cute, but I'm 30, 35, 40 years older than, well, maybe not 40, but so much older than them. I'm a different generation. I want to see more young people. I want to see people willing to stand up. And again, it isn't about our being right and the other side being wrong. It's about bringing a diverse, open, interesting voice of this magnificent place called Israel. So first of all, you go and you talk with individuals. Most of us want to go out right now and immediately impact the world. I don't go and talk all the time on CNN, BBC, or the other channels, because again, there it's about the framing. I go and I talk to people. When you go and talk to one person, and that one person talks to another person, you're already going to make an impact. Any single person who has actually been to Israel, they come here, and we have found far and throughout that anybody who comes here goes back afterwards and says, it's not at all like I thought. You hear that from person after person. So that's what we need to do, is to have it one voice at a time, 10 voices at a time, 1,000 voices at a time. It isn't about impacting the world day in, day out. I want to give a warning here. There's a conflict. Remember that. Those pictures are going to come out. Last summer was an example of how Israel found itself in overwhelmingly big numbers supporting the government, understanding what was going on, and giving backing to the Israeli government. And worldwide, we were vilified, both because of the pictures, but also because of the framing. And we need to be aware of that gap, because otherwise we can't bridge the gap. The other side needs to be aware of the gap too. What you need to do is to open up their willingness to say, maybe it isn't just the way I thought. If you can actually do that, sow the doubt, you've made a big difference. So first of all, I want to talk in their language and not in my language. I'm going to try and give this in the following way. In Israel, we frame things from a security point of view. It's about our defense, it's about our security, it's about the threat to our security, and then we open up the conversation. In Europe, overwhelmingly, they frame the conversation from a humanitarian point of view. Now, people who talk security, they have a tendency when they talk to people who talk humanitarian to look at them, as I am right now, and go, right, sure, that's nice here in Europe. People who talk humanitarian, when they hear people who are talking security, they have a tendency to look at them as ogres, as monsters, as gun-toting individuals who think that anything is allowed because of security. We have to understand that gap. If I talk in the humanitarian tone, not just tone, but in that voice, in those terms, with the Europeans, I already open the door. If I am willing to stand up and say that I think that the Palestinians are victims, I've opened up a door. I think that they're victims. They can be victims of their own leadership. They can be victims. That doesn't, beneath the fact that they're victims. A child is a child is a child. If I can open up and start with that, I open up a door with the Europeans that enables me to have that conversation about the challenges that are there. But if I stand up and say, it's about my defense, and the pictures and the framing are about the Palestinian victims, I'm not going to be able to talk to most Europeans. When I talk about geopolitics, I give a framing of what's going on in our arena. I talk about Israeli domestic challenges, and I talk about Israeli regional challenges. The world looks at Israel through the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. When I wake up in the morning in Israel, when you wake up in the morning in Israel, we're not always thinking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This I convey both in Israel and worldwide. The changes in Israeli domestic numbers is enormous. 1 in 7 Israelis' native tongue is Russian. People don't think about that in the world. When you talk about the Israeli Defense Forces, 1 in 4 soldiers in the Israeli Defense Forces that's drafted, native tongue, Russian. What does that mean? When we talk about the images inside Israel right now, we see images of the Haredi, ultra-Orthodox Jews. We see images of the Israeli-Ethiopian community. Try and put those into a broader context. Talk about our day-to-day life. What do we want? Jobs? Good education for our kids? To be able to afford to buy an apartment? If that's what interests us right now, then the world needs to understand why, again, we're interested in that and not in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It doesn't define us. And that's a very important gap, and I try to bridge that and to broaden it worldwide. In addition, I talk extensively about the security geopolitical challenges and perhaps opportunities in our region right now. Over the last 4 years, our region has changed totally. I like to show a map, which is an aerial photo of the Middle East. All it shows is the topographical contours of the Middle East. It's beautiful. The green, the blue of the Nile, and the enormous tracts of desert. Why am I telling you this? Because the only thing that has not changed in the Middle East in the last 4 years is the topographical map. Go show a political map with lines. What are the lines of Syria divided from Turkey, divided from Iraq, divided from Lebanon? What does that mean today? There is no such thing called Syria. We have a border with Syria. It's not on the other side of the world. What are the implications, both of the Syrian civil war? What are the different impacts of Iran, Hezbollah, Syria? These are the different issues that I discuss both in Israel and worldwide. The forum itself, when it was established, was mainly supposed to be focused on having discourse with Palestinian women. Sadly, the Palestinian women refused to meet us. This is true not just of the Dvorah Forum. I know of many other reaching out forums nowadays, and even worse over the last 5-6 years. Very difficult to have any official engagement. You can only have unofficial. Within the forum itself, what we have tried to open up is the discourse within Israeli society, again, focused on the women. We brought in Haredi women who came and discussed with us their challenges. Now, that's not national security, or is it? We brought in Arab citizens of Israel, Arab women who have challenges that we, who think that we have challenges because there are no women around the security cabinet table, my God, they're a minority within a minority. Arab women who have high education, who want to go further in life. This is real challenging, so we have had this domestic type of discourse. We would love to have more discourse beyond it, but what we have been very strict about is that politics don't enter into the Deborah Forum, which means that around our table, both in our steering committee and in all of our members, we have women from every spectrum of the political ideology. And what we share in that sense is the need for women to be part of the national security discourse. We're not instead of other women organizations in Israel, which in general are promoting women's rights. We are very specific on the national security agenda. They're no different than any other socio-economic challenged portion. They have an added issue of identity, but their challenge that you just described now is a socio-economic challenge. The two poor sections of Israeli society, overwhelmingly, are the Haredi, ultra-Orthodox population, and the Arab citizens of Israel. So here it's the same type of challenge. It can be changed through education, representation, through different social economic structuring that they're trying to do. Roads and infrastructure can make an impact. Roads and infrastructure are part of national security. Where do you build the roads? Who invests? Who has the impact? Do you build it to Arab towns, Arab places? Do you build trains, etc.? These are all aspects that come to the table. The identity issue is an added one. I think that to be an Arab citizen of Israel is challenging. You know what? I don't know that the Haredi women are less challenged. They're supposed to be committed to their Jewish community, not to the state of Israel. So we have challenges on all fronts. I think that as an Israeli society we have challenges on all fronts, but I don't see them specifically being challenged more on the identity front than on the socioeconomic front. So we've already managed in the last several years to impact both Security Cabinet and Cabinet decisions to have more representation of women. We've met with all of the women ministers. We've reached out to all of the cabinet ministers, not just the women. The women will meet us. We've reached out to all of the Israeli Knesset members, 120 members. Right now, for the first time in Israeli history, 30 women Knesset members. We have reached out to all of them. We have meetings with all of them. What we offer, we don't want to be there. If we want to run for office, that's something else. What we're offering is expertise, women experts, a women's voice to add in so that when they say that they want to make decisions, when they want to have committees, that it isn't, oh, there were no women who could be on the committee. We bring the women with the expertise to make sure that our voice is not just we have a problem, but that we can also help resolve it. I certainly think that there are within us women who have both been members of parties. In our greater membership right now into the Knesset, there are 2 women who were very strong members of the forum who were voted in now. So now they're, helping us from the outside, but they're doing more of that. We have strong connections both with women, but the idea is to reach out to everybody. Every man in Israeli society probably has a mother. Many of them have daughters or sisters. And we think that it's important that everybody, wives, that it's important that everybody understands that what we're doing isn't about women, it's about society. If you go and look now at any conference which has to do with geopolitics or security, count the amount of women who aren't the host, the ones who are sitting around the table, the ones who are actually giving the expert opinions. We're still trying to make sure that there are more women, more talking. So in our forum, we allow these women to be able to stand, to talk, to enable them, to empower them, so that we feel that we, in this stage, hear the men's voices enough. Let's hear the women. I hope in time that we will broaden our idea. It isn't against that, but we really are about women's voices.
Welcome to another Leon Charney Report, and we are talking to you directly from Tel Aviv, Israel. It's a pretty nice day. It's sunny. It's about 85 degrees, and you should really be on the beach. People here are doing that. They're going on the beach. If you recall, about 4 months ago when I was in Israel, I interviewed this great lady called Colonel Miri Eisin. Great because she was illuminating and elucidating exactly what they had found, the Israeli army, when they raided the compound of Yasser Arafat. And she gave us all those documents, a lot of them anyway. We talked about it and we filmed it and we talked about Miri. And now she's back with us, and she's still a colonel in the IDF, and but she's become a little bit of a media star. So we're glad we have her, and she'll fill us in a little bit about what's going on, because things have been a little bit better, just a little bit better. There's a plan on the map now called Gaza First, and which may extend to Ramallah, and we'll talk about that with Miri. Miri, welcome.
It's very nice to be here.
So are we a little bit better off than we were? Well, I think it was about April when we were here, correct?
In April, we were in the midst of an operation, which at the time we really didn't know how it would end, Operation Defensive Shield. Since then, we've actually been in a series of operations where the forces of the Israel Defense Forces are inside Palestinian cities. And I always am very wary about saying things, but at the moment it does seem to be a bit better. What that means is that the Israel Defense Forces, by going into these cities, has managed to make security a little bit more secure in Israeli cities. Doesn't mean that things can't happen in any given moment. But one of the things that Israeli society has shown is that we have stamina. And that stamina is starting to show on the Palestinian side. The fact that we have a backbone and that we're willing to last this out and that we're not going anywhere is really starting to make a difference. The idea of Gaza and the city of Bethlehem, where the Church of the Nativity is, of the two of them first, Bethlehem has already started, and that means that for the first time for over a year, the security forces of the Palestinians, one of the security organizations, is starting to act in the city of Bethlehem. They're starting to take responsibility, which is what we had demanded the entire time. In the Gaza Strip, other security organizations are starting to take responsibility. For us, that means that they are responsible for the security, for there not being terrorism in the Palestinian Authority or against Israel and Israel proper.
You know, I've been in Israel a lot, many times. I've been involved with peace process, etc. Sometimes it's physics. You have to go down very low and then it starts to percolate up. I think the Israeli society is learning somehow that something has to happen because the future must involve, I guess, some kind of compromise someplace. Otherwise, this just living with never understanding where the end is very difficult. I know that the Army and the Defense Forces have a lot of people drawing papers up on that. You know, in the United States, people don't own the answers. They see one, they see the left wing, the right wing, they see the center, they don't know where it's going. I have to tell you that I've been reading a lot and seeing a lot about papers that are being written by the Israeli Defense Forces, and they're very impressive. And they give a lot of hope for the future of Israel. I mean, politically, they're going to be tough, obviously, but I have to say that, because if you sit in New York, you don't hear anything good. People just waffling around and thinking God knows the world's coming to an end, and tourists don't come here, and people say it's dangerous to walk on the street. Well, I've been here for 3 weeks, thank God, and you know, it's been pretty good. And the beach has been pretty nice to me, and things are working. But what I sense is that there's a yearning here to do something, to change things that have happened. Now, I don't know how far you can go because you're in the military, but there are planners in the military who come up with concepts that make this place compatible with a general life. And I think we have to portray that to the public because they don't know anything about it. So you tell me how far you can go with that without disclosing things which you should not talk about, which I have no doubt you wouldn't anyway.
I'll try.
That was a long question, but...
We have a saying in the IDF, in the Israel Defense Forces, that if anybody knows the solution to the problem, they should stand up. And nobody stands up because nobody thinks that there's one solution. But what we do have in this situation, in our terms, the military terms, is to let there be very obvious facts about what does have to happen. One thing which I think is the big change which has happened, which is why I think we said that it's a little bit better, is the fact that we are not going to let terrorism win. And we've shown that. And in military terms, we are showing terrorism. The terrorism is something that you can combat. You can't stop it completely. You can never subdue it completely. But you can do a lot of very active things against terrorists, terrorist organizations, their weapons, what they're trying to perpetrate all of the time. The other aspect is that we are trying to look and see what are the different options. We see it in the intelligence terms of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian leadership, the countries around us, and what we can do. As you mentioned yourself, there are two sides here. There's the Israelis and there's the Palestinians. I think that we are beyond the stage of denying that. And the question is, okay, there are two parties here. Let's try and think what we can do. And the different options at the end are political. But what we do try to address are the different options. The government will decide whatever the government decides, and we, the Israel Defense Forces, will do whatever our democratic government decides. We do try to bring up different ideas, which aren't political. They're based on the security ideas of what will influence or not influence the Palestinian people. The Palestinian people at the end sitting there, the ones who voted in Yasser Arafat, who at the moment have become extremely violent as a society. How do we influence them? How do we find a common voice? I try to address it on the level of a mother. How do I, as a mother, find the voice of the Palestinian mother so that at the end we have something in common? As long as Palestinian mothers send their kids to commit suicide, I don't think we're going to find common ground. But we're seeing less of that. We're starting to see the fact that families are not condoning their children committing suicide. They're starting to understand that there's not only a price, but that at the end, this is something which is against both their own law and any type of human ideas. And I think that here we may start finding the common ground.
You know, last time we were here, you talked about this treasurer who was signing all the checks for Arafat. I forgot his name.
Fuad Shubaki.
He's in jail now, is that correct?
He's in jail in Jericho. I saw an interview with him yesterday in the Jerusalem Post.
So did I.
I found that interesting because that is completely against any of the rules that were put down when they're in jail. People in jail are not supposed to give interviews.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's a side issue at the moment. The interview is already out. Certainly the journalist wanted to get the interview. But he, in jail, in Jericho, still from there even, tries to continue to run some of those aspects which we had spoken about last time of smuggling arms. Just yesterday and today, we're in the midst of something that we're not sure if it was an arms smuggling through the sea off the Gaza Strip coast. And these are different issues that still continue. And it has to do with the heads.
Who are the jailers there now? Who watches those jails?
It's a combination. It's inside a Palestinian jail.
Right.
And the jailers themselves are British and American.
Soldiers or...
I call them intelligence personnel.
Intelligence.
It was part of when Yasser Arafat was allowed to leave the compound at the end of April last year, which is a bit
Right.
before when you were here at the time.
Right.
Part of that was the fact that both Fuad Shubaki, as the chief smuggler, and as I mentioned, he's the financial advisor to Yasser Arafat, and the assassins of Rechavam Ze'evi, Israel's tourism minister, until he was assassinated a year and a half ago, that all of them would be put in jail, and they were put in jail, and all of them, sadly, from their jail continue to, at least through phones, continue to do a lot of activity.
And they're allowed to have cell phones in the jails?
They're not supposed to.
Who put down the law there, by the way? That was an agreement made between whom?
It was a quiet agreement that was done at the time between the Palestinians and the negotiators, because the whole effect was that Yasser Arafat would be let out of the compound. That was the final end of the agreement itself. So it was people from Yasser Arafat, together with a combination of some of the foreigners who were here, the British and the American here.
What is the present situation now of Arafat and the compound? Is he surrounded by Israeli troops?
He's surrounded, but he could leave the compound itself within Ramallah, but he can't go out further than that, as in through the different cities. The negotiation process about Bethlehem and the Gaza Strip have been done with people who are his close advisors. Saeb Erekat is the one who is more known, certainly for the American audience. He's one of the chief negotiators.
Let's start doing commercials, that guy. He's on every time you look at a TV show. Probably be selling cigars next year.
Yeah, I find it interesting that the person himself, the words, he has a very strong rhetoric, which I have a very strong problem with, because it doesn't have anything to do with reality. It has to do with what he wants to say. But that's one of the negotiators, and he's certainly one of their chief people.
What is the position of the IDF concerning Arafat's compound today?
Well, for us, we do what the government tells us in the compound itself. He's in the compound and he can go around in Ramallah itself. We're physically not in the compound as we were in the past. We're on the outskirts of the compound itself.
You can't go water skiing.
I don't know if he'd want to go water skiing. I don't think he could go skiing either. But he can't go out around the world as he's always been used to. Yet again, he is more or less only in his areas. What we have started and initiated now is the fact that the forces that were in Bethlehem have been evacuated completely. We're not sitting within the city of Bethlehem, and we're not within the Gaza Strip, or at least all of the different portions that we had been in before. But aside from that, in the other Palestinian cities of Judea and Samaria, we're still sitting as a military. And that's many cities. That's an additional 6 cities.
How's the morale in the Army? I mean, we read stuff in the United States, reservists don't want to serve. You know these stories. Is that a big deal in the Army today?
It's not a big deal. It's gotten a lot of publicity, which really has nothing to do with what actually happens in Israel. There are 2 separate issues with the reservists here. The one issue, which is a non-issue in Israel, even though it got a lot of publicity in the States, is the issue of not willing to serve in Judea and Samaria. That's not an issue in Israel at all. It's only publicists and it's politics, and those people went to the States because nobody wanted to listen to them here. And that's not an issue at all. The reservists are coming and they're working. The reservists themselves have brought up a different issue, which is an economic one, and it has to do with inner Israeli politics. And it's more on the issue of benefits, who does reserves and who doesn't do reserves in Israel, and not on the political background of actually doing it in Judea and Samaria. Because here they came and they say, how is it that not all Israelis participate in what at the end is a very harsh reality of doing 40 days a year in reserve duty? And all of the ultra-Orthodox, the ultra-religious, don't participate in that at all, and there were a lot of issues because of that.
There was a one of the Palestinian officials who was in jail and was escorted or got out to London the other day, and one of Arafat's henchmen. Is that a great intelligence find for the Israeli Defense Forces?
Certainly any one of these people, when we can get to them and interrogate them, give us an immense amount of information. In April, I spoke to you about documents, because at the time we had taken archives and we were looking through the documents. But I'd say that now in August, we're a lot more smart, I'd call that, because of the interrogations. We've arrested, at this stage along the way, thousands of Palestinian terrorists, including around 300 top terrorists. I'm talking about the ones who recruit other people, who know how to find the weapons, who get the money, who think out what the targets are going to be. And that interrogation has given us an immense amount of information, which is one of the reasons that right now it's a little bit better. Through the interrogations, through the archives, we've really managed to clamp down on all of the top terrorists, on a lot of the middle ones, and it takes them a while until they can renew themselves.
You told me last time that there was a treasure trove of papers. Have you gone through all of them? Have you been able to get, or it's just impossible?
It's just impossible. What we're doing now is a little bit different, because we have a hangar, physically it's a hangar, full of documents.
Really?
And we've cataloged it, sort of like you do in a library, meaning we haven't read every single document, but we've cataloged what we have with it. This is a file taken from the general intelligence, this is a file taken from the general security, and so on and so forth. And now we ask questions, and what we're really doing at this stage is saying, we'd be interested in knowing what, for example, the general intelligence was doing against terrorists in 1999, and then we go back and look specifically at those issues. Right now, I'd say that one of the main issues that we're interested in, for example, is the involvement of both Syria and Iran in terrorism in the Palestinian Authority. And we started looking through the documents, and lo and behold, when you ask a question, you find the answers. And those are new issues that we hope to come out with in a short time.
Miri, always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.